Dear candidates, one more lecture in my series on the anatomy of ocular adnexa, and this is going to be on the conjunctiva. We shall start with the macroscopic anatomy, that is the gross or the anatomy with the naked eye. When we look at the eye from a frontal view, we can see a small reddish fleshy mass on the medial side that you all know, which is called the caruncle. This is sometimes hairy. Next to it, there is a fold on the surface of the eye called the plica semilunaris, where the tear film is pooled. And the pool of tear film here is called the lacus lacrimalis. And this structure here covering the sclera is the bulbar conjunctiva, and this is the limbus. On a diagrammatic sagittal section, we can see the bulbar conjunctiva on the ocular surface and the palpebral conjunctiva lining the upper and lower eyelids, and both connected together and reflected at the cul-de-sac, superiorly called the superior fornix and inferiorly called the inferior fornix. The same thing occurs, but in a shallower fashion medially and laterally, and on the front view, this is the bulbar conjunctiva, as we said. Now, this is the view of the live eye. Number one is the bulbar conjunctiva, number two is the sclera, number three is the fornix, where the bulbar conjunctiva reflects to line the upper lid or lower lid. Number four is the palpebral conjunctiva, number six is the lid margin, number five is the punctum lacrimalis. Now the bulbar conjunctiva covers the sclera, and the caruncle is a small mass, 5 by 3 millimeters, fleshy and nodular, and the fornix, as we said, is the cul-de-sac that reflects onto the globe. The limbal conjunctiva is 3 millimeters from the cornea to the bulbar surface, and the palpebral conjunctiva or the tarsal conjunctiva lines the interior of the eyelids. The plica semilunaris is a semilunar fold, arc-shaped, lateral to the caruncle, and it represents the vestigial nictitating membrane of lower species, what is called the third lid. This is a remnant phylogenetically, but humans don't have a third lid. Now this is the sagittal section, and this is the conjunctival sac. When the eye is open, the sac is open, as you can see. When the lids close together with the eye shut, this is the conjunctival sac, which is a closed space. And now we shift to microscopic anatomy of the conjunctiva. The epithelium of the conjunctiva is 2 to 5 cell layers, and the stroma is composed of a superficial adenoid layer and a deep fibrous layer with the accessory lacrimal glands. The accessory lacrimal glands are four. First, the goblet cells, which are denser infranasally, the glands of Krause and Wolfring, the crypts of Henle, which are just folds in the epithelium, numerous in the upper one-third of the superior tarsal conjunctiva, as well as the lower third of the inferior tarsal conjunctiva, and finally the glands of Mans, which are more around the limbus. All the details of the histology of these structures has been described in the lecture on the anatomy of the lacrimal system. Now, the histological section here shows the conjunctiva, which is just a mucous membrane, the lid, and the globe. It is covered by a non-keratinized squamous epithelium intermixed with goblet cells and the substantia propria of the mucous membrane of the conjunctiva. This is the epithelium, and this is the superficial adenoid layer and the deep fibrous layer. Both adenoid and fibrous layers compose the substantia propria. Epithelium, 2 to 5 layers, here 2 layers. The adenoid layer with the lymphoid aggregates and the fibrous layer with the fibrous tissue. The two together compose the substantia propria. Now the caruncle. The caruncle has epithelium of multiple layers with folds, but non-keratinized as well. We come now to the bulbar conjunctiva structure, and this is composed of cuboidal and columnar epithelium with goblet cells, as we said, more numerous infranasally and especially near the fornix, and with a substantia propria as well. The caruncle, just the conjunctival epithelium of the regular type that contains cutaneous adnexal structures, just like hairs, with accessory lacrimal gland tissue. The plica semilunaris, or the semilunar fold, has abundant goblet cells, rarely has cartilage and smooth muscle. The palpebral or tarsal conjunctiva has pseudoglands of Henle, the crypts of Henle, just folds in the epithelium, not actual glands, invaginations, otherwise described, tubular and cystic. The substantia propria of the palpebral conjunctiva is more uniform than the bulbar conjunctiva. This is because it is closely attached to the tarsus, impossible to separate, and invasive lesions here appear flat. The lymphoid aggregates are more near the fornix, and acini and ducts of accessory lacrimal glands exist here as well, of Wolfring and Krause. This is a histological section to show a comparison of the substantia propria of the bulbar conjunctiva B and the tarsal conjunctiva T. You can simply notice that there is tight adherence of the substantia propria of the tarsal conjunctival epithelium and loose adherence to compare on the bulbar side. Now the fornix. The fornix has pseudostratified columnar epithelium, meaning one layer but not actual stratification, not real multiple layers, but rather crowded cells that come side by side with the pseudo impression that one lies above the other. And here the conjunctiva is rich in goblet cells and contains accessory lacrimal glands, ductules of main lacrimal gland, as well as lymphoid follicles. The limbal conjunctiva contains corneal epithelial stem cells in the basal layer with branching dendritic melanocytes. This is very important to remember, that in the limbal part of the conjunctiva there are corneal stem cells. Here appear the conjunctival goblet cells among pseudostratified epithelium, and here keratinization appearing near the lid margin. Near the lid margin, the epithelium is in a transitional phase to change into skin, and it is therefore keratinized. After finishing a description of the macroscopic and the microscopic structure of the conjunctiva, we now shift to the blood supply of the conjunctiva. The bulbar conjunctiva is supplied by blood from the ophthalmic artery, while the palpebral conjunctiva takes blood supply from the external carotid. Actually, both are linked together. We can see here that the anterior conjunctival artery and the posterior conjunctival artery both come from the ophthalmic, which comes from the internal carotid, while the palpebral conjunctiva takes blood from
branches of the external carotid artery. We shift now to the nerve supply of the conjunctiva, and we can divide it into superior, inferior, lateral, and circumcorneal parts. The superior conjunctival division is supplied by the supraorbital nerve, the inferior is supplied by the infraorbital nerve, while the lateral part is supplied by the lacrimal nerve with a contribution from the zygomaticofacial nerve, and the circumcorneal area takes nerve supply from the long ciliary nerves. Now the lymphatic drainage into the regional lymph nodes, this is a sort of a repetition of the lymphatic drainage of the eyelids. We divide the conjunctiva into two halves. The lateral half drains into the preauricular parotid lymph nodes, and the submandibular lymph nodes drain the nasal half. And this is a diagrammatic presentation where the lateral half is drained into the preauricular lymph nodes, the medial half into the submandibular lymph nodes, and both drain into the upper deep cervical lymph nodes. Finally, to relate the structure to function, we have the following functions of the conjunctiva. The first is lubrication, and this is aided, of course, by its content of goblet cells, lubricating the motility of the eyelids, both upper and lower, on the ocular surface, and aiding in the process of ocular resurfacing, as well as wetting the ocular surface all the time. The second function is protection from foreign bodies and microorganisms through the lubrication and through the secretion of immunoglobulins. And finally, it serves nutrition of the eye surface and the eyelids via the conjunctival blood vessels, and the ocular surface, the cornea, takes some nutrition from the tear film. Thank you very much.